Good day, folks. It's Tony from the Tech Firm. Today I'm going to walk you through how to install a Ubiquiti Edgerouter from scratch. So I'm going to take you right from the reset process all the way to configuring it without using the wizard, all right? And I think that's kind of important in this exercise. It's not that complicated and there isn't that many steps to the process, so I encourage you to give this a try, or at least pay attention to the wizard when it asks you the questions, and you'll see how this relates to it. So enjoy. We're going to jump right into it. And I got a couple slides for you. So I know some of you may opt for the installation wizard. That's fine, but I think it's important to go through this process. And by going through this, you'll understand how routers work and you'll have better troubleshooting skills. Now, what's really important with this exercise at the very beginning is a good old paperclip, believe it or not. I know you try to use, I've seen people with pencils, pens, the ends of their glasses. Just get a paperclip. It works every time. Trust me, it works. You're obviously going to need a web browser. You're going to need your computer wired to port Ethernet 0, and that's kind of important. And then optionally, if you have the connection from the router to the internet, that's great too. You can test that out as well. You need some focus, right? Pay attention. Don't do 20 things at once. And obviously, these notes. So the computer setup is going to be slightly different if you're doing this remotely for somebody versus if you're locally have the router beside you, but you can adjust accordingly. I'm working with a remote scenario. That's what I'm going to pretend that what I'm doing. So I'm going to decide which ports are for the local network and which are for the internet. Now this is extremely important. You don't need a fancy diagram, just a napkin with a box and 2 lines. You just need to make sure you identify what ports you want for your LAN and which ports you want for your WAN. Okay, that's incredibly important. Write it down, because sometimes you get halfway through the process and you get them inverted, or instead of Ethernet 1 you do Ethernet 2 or Ethernet 9 or whatever. Keep it straight in your head, all right? And this is the way my lab is set up. So we're going to locate the reset button on the front of the unit. Disconnect the power cord. I always like to use a power bar just because it's way more convenient than reaching in the back and pulling a barrel connector out. And while reconnecting the power cord or turning on your actual power bar, press and hold the reset button. You'll see that the ports will light up, ports 1 through 4 for example. Don't hold that button too long, because if you let it go through 2 rounds of those lights, then I say the disco lights come on and all the lights alternate, and now you're called TFTP recovery mode, or just a recovery mode in which you use TFTP to put the image back on it. So we don't want that. We just want to reset the settings, all right? And that's it. So I'm going to show you that video right now, and then we'll jump right into it. We're going to reset this router back to factory. Anybody who's been doing this longer than 5 or 6 years understand this paper clip is kind of key to all this. We have a reset button that we're going to use. I keep everything on a power bar when I want to reset it, just to make it easier. I'm not fumbling with the cables behind it. So right now I've got a link light to my laptop because I'm going to be configuring it when I'm done. So I'm going to power it off. That's this specific model. Check your own model. You've probably got a different way of doing it. Turn it on, and now I'm going to press and hold this paper clip in this reset hole, and what you're going to notice is that the link lights across these ports are going to light up in sequence, and when it gets to the end of the 4th port, then it's done its process. See? So I can let go now. If you notice, the status light on the left hand side here is flashing, and now it's a solid blue. If you let this go too long, it'll dance across once, twice, and then you get this, I call the disco effect, and then it's in a recovery mode. You don't want that. You just want to reset this back to factory, and that's it. So this is something you might do if you don't know the password. If it came out of the field and you just want to start from scratch, it's a very, very common thing. I strongly encourage you to go through this once with any of your equipment, so when you have to do it, it's not a big deal. Get familiar with the LEDs, get familiar with the flashes, the colors, and that way if you ask somebody at a remote location, which I do a lot, and I can ask them, hey, is that light at the end flashing? Is it solid? Is it blue? Is it white? The link light, is it on? And that sort of thing. All right, there you go, folks. All right, so we need to know that Ethernet 0 port that we connected to is 192.168.1.1. and you need a static IP address on your laptop. So in my case, I did 192.168.1.123, 24-bit mask, 255.255.255.0, and that's it. So you don't need a DNS, you don't need a gateway, you don't need any of that stuff. We're just talking to the router right now. I also made some plans and said I want my Ethernet 1 LAN network to be 10.99, and my Ethernet 7 is going to be internet using DHCP. Go. So when we ping the router, we should get a response now if all your IP settings are correct. If they don't work, revisit the IP settings on your Ethernet interface. Make sure you don't do your Wi-Fi by mistake or virtual interface, that kind of stuff. If you have more than one Ubiquiti unit on your network, you may actually hit another one if they're, again, port 0 is plugged into both ports on your switch, like I did. So one of them will be further away, like 1 millisecond, 10 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, and the other one's going to be less than 1 millisecond. And that's kind of how I knew which one I was on, and if I knew that other one was done booting up, because all of a sudden the response times were less than a millisecond. Your place will vary, of course. So from a web browser, 192.168.1.1, you're going to get your connection is not private routine. We just click advanced and proceed. So from here, we're going to log in with the default login, UBNT for the login, UBNT for the password. You're going to be prompted, do you want to use the basic setup wizard? I'm going to say no. And we're going to label the ports. So if you come on down to Ethernet 1, which we want to do, you can click on Actions, and we're just going to call it LAN. You call it internal, you call it whatever you want. Just get it away from the default ETH1. It makes more sense later on when you see it in a screen. We're going to give it a static address, 10.99.10.254 with a 24-bit mask. Some people prefer the router to be the first address. Some people prefer it to be the last address. Do whatever makes you happy. When you're done, you'll actually see that the label will now say LAN or whatever you called it. It'll still be disconnected because we haven't done anything with it yet, but that's fine, right? We're just naming them right now. Now we're going to go configure port Ethernet 7, which is our internet port. So we're going to call it internet, and we're going to use DHCP. Again, it's in my case, I plugged it in so it says connected, and I actually got an IP address, which is awesome, okay, because I want to test that out. So from there, you can do a test. Now we're going to test the router to make sure it can get to the internet, because again, I have an internet connection here, without DNS. Okay, I'm not testing DNS yet. So we're just going to ping 8888, Google's public DNS IP, and hopefully it works. Right? If it does, go to step 2. Now we're going to replace the IP with a name. Hopefully that works. If that works, you've just proven the router can get to the internet and the router's DNS settings work. Not anybody connected to the router or through the router, just the router. So this is kind of like step 1, right? If none of this worked, you got to go back. You got to figure out why. But at this point, if this works, we can go to the next step. We're going to set up DHCP for our LAN, right? So DHCP name, you can call it LAN, LAN scope, LAN DHCP. I've seen all sorts of variations on the name, doesn't matter. To get there, you just simply go to the Services tab and click Add DHCP Server. I think what's kind of important is that you figure out your ranges, right? So I wanted 100 to 200. Again, some people like 1 to 100 or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just figure out a standard, what you would like, right? In my case, my router is 10.99.10.254. So that's the router that I'm going to point everybody to. And DNS is going to be my router as well. So I'm going to configure DNS forwarding. So with DNS, we need to configure the router with a DNS server. And that way, people can actually get to the internet by using a name. So we're going to click on System. You're going to go to the name under System Host Name. We're going to give it a name, just any old name. It's got nothing to do with DNS, just giving it a name, just so I can recognize it because I have more than one Ubiquiti device on my network. Then we enter the DNS server IP under System Name Server, and 888, for example, or 111, or 8844, doesn't matter. If you have the US IP checked off by default, depending on the version that you have, please uncheck it right now. We don't need that. and then scroll all the way to the bottom and click save. People forget to do this. They just exit the screen. Don't. Go to the bottom and hit save. Now we're going to set up our DNS forwarding. So what this does is we ask the router to resolve a DNS name, and the router asks, in our case, 8888, right? What's important about that is by default, Ubiquiti will not allow interfaces to query it. So it's kind of like almost a security thing, if you will. You have to allow certain interfaces to talk to the router, and that way people on the internet side can't exploit the router for DNS attack reflections and all that kind of nonsense. So in this case, we only want our LAN to be able to talk to the router or forward DNS stuff, which is ETH1. Remember LAN, we called it LAN. That's the one we want. If you notice, you can add more interfaces. So if you did have another router interface for cameras or IoT or whatever, you have to add that to this list as well. Cache size, we're just going to put 500 in there. It's good enough for now. And then ETH1, don't forget to click save, right? Now we have to set up some NAT, network address translation. So if you want to get into it, there's all sorts of variations on NATs and PATs and all that kind of stuff. We don't care. All you need to know is that network address translation in the Ubiquiti world is also called masquerade. All right, and most Linux firewalls will also refer to it as masquerade as well. But you need to pay attention to what ports people come in on. Again, it's 1, and out of, which is 7. So all these things on the bottom of the screen here in this box are going to go through 1 and then come out of 1 public IP address or whatever the address is on the WAN or internet port of the router. If you pay attention, in this case 10.44.10 is not a public IP. Does not matter. It's still going to NAT it. Alright. So we go to firewall NAT, we go down to NAT, and we're going to add a source NAT rule. Source. So we're going to call it LAN to WAN, for example. Make sure it's enabled. The outbound going to the internet, in our case, was 7. So adjust that to whatever your internet port is. Please make sure this is checked off because it's not by default. So the translation is going to use masquerade, and we want all protocols. So as you can see, if you just take a moment, just look at the screen, you can do quite a bit here, right? Like you could really tweak this to your choosing, but for us, that's good enough for now. So the big test, we're going to remove the static IP from our laptop, because remember we're plugged into Ethernet 0 with that static IP. So static IP comes off the laptop. We're going to move the connection to Ethernet 1 from 0. So now my laptop's on Ethernet 1. Take it a step further. Disable your Wi-Fi or go to airplane mode, whatever works. And that way you're going to force everything through your Ethernet card. You don't want it going through your Wi-Fi. You think it works and it really doesn't. First thing you do is run a traceroute dash lowercase d as a delta. This tells your machine not to do a DNS lookup. It just makes the traceroute go quicker, that's all. So make sure that this is going through the 10.99 or whatever your local subnet is for your router. And then after that, try going to a website. And that's it. So in the real world, what else would I do? I'd put it on USIP. I might set up other ports on the routers for cameras, IoT. I might set up load balancing or failover if I have more than one connection. Configure a firewall on the internet port so people can't get into it. I've already got articles for all this stuff already. I change UBNT to admin just because I do that as just my standard. And then I check and upgrade the firmware if it needs an update. So that's it. That's it. I really don't think that's going to take you long, maybe half an hour at most the first time, but after you do it once or twice, you'll get the hang of it. So have a good day, folks. Hope you enjoyed that. Bye for now.